Welcome to the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast.
I absolutely admire each and every single individual team, and the fact that they, as you say, everybody's in their own race. Whether you're racing for first or whether you're racing for seventh, it's about the journey, and it's about, overcoming whatever challenges are thrown at you, and potentially those challenges may involve other teams around you and having to adapt and having to, outwit them or outstrength them or outlast them or whatever. And I think there's an immense beauty in that. Doesn't matter where you actually come overall. It's about, those team journeys in the middle.
Well, for me, the action is the juice. I'm in.
Say the word, Chef.
Let it rip.
This is Bob Miller, founder of Wilderness Traverse. I'm inviting you to join us in July 2025 for our classic Canadian 30-hour adventure race. We're proud to have been selected as the Adventure Racing World Series North America Championship and are excited to welcome the continent's best teams to compete for the Bob the Beaver Trophy and free entry into the 2026 Adventure Racing World Championships. Just 4 hours north of Toronto, Sudbury offers an epic wilderness experience with forests, rugged trails, and abundant lakes. With the World Champs this September in British Columbia, this is the year to race in Canada. And here's a great bonus for our U.S. neighbors. With the strength of the U.S. dollar, it's great value for an incredible experience. Visit wildernesstraverse.com to register.
Imagine a world where young women in Afghanistan and Pakistan rise above societal constraints, embracing their strength and potential. Ascend Athletics is making this vision a reality. Through mountaineering-based leadership training, Ascend empowers girls and women aged 15 to 24 to become courageous leaders in their communities. By conquering physical summits, these young women build self-esteem and develop skills that last a lifetime. Operating since 2015 in Afghanistan, expanded to Pakistan in 2023, Ascend focuses on regions where gender inequality is most pronounced, providing tools for girls and women to lead empowered lives. Join the Dark Zone in supporting these brave young women as they climb towards a brighter future. Visit ascendathletics.org to learn more about and contribute to this transformative mission. And remember, Ascend pays nothing for the spot. We love the work that they do, and the Dark Zone is happy to support it.
Welcome to the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. When we do these episodes, listeners will know, and there's a lot of you out there, that we interview across a wide spectrum of the adventure racing community, right? We'll go with newer racers, experienced racers. We'll go with big races, small races. We want to provide an avenue, a spotlight on a variety of different experiences. And we love the fact that we have this international appeal, that we talk to people all over the world. And today, our episode brings us to the South African-Namibia border, and our guest will talk about that a little bit. I have Robert Le Brun of the Ratel, which is a race coming out of South Africa, out of that part of the world. We're delighted to have him on the show today. We've had our technology challenges. Hopefully, our Wi-Fi will hold steady for this, but that's the price we pay for speaking to somebody through our magic boxes around the world. So, Robert, great to have you on the Dark Zone. Thanks for your working with us, technology, and patience. We love to highlight your race. Tell us a bit about you and the race that you're putting on.
Yeah, so first and foremost, thanks so much for having me. It's a privilege. Love to listen to the podcast and excited to be on it. Yeah, so I guess was drawn to adventure racing in around 2015, and I was immensely excited when someone told me, yes, you move for over 500 kilometers and you sleep anywhere. And immediately I was like, oh, wow. And I think for a good couple of years here in South Africa, I watched, the big race Expedition Africa go by. And in the year 2016, I watched it avidly. I was a dot watcher, 2017, 2018. And I was like, I've got to get on the start line. And by around 2018, I'd done a couple of races. And then luckily in 2019, I got to do the Rodrigues Island Expedition Africa, which was a really incredible introduction, I think, to expedition racing for me.
That's quite the deep end of the pool to start your race. How did that go for you?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, what an incredible race. I mean, I don't know, for those that didn't do it, it was literally an island of only about 4 kilometers wide and about 15 kilometers long or so. And to how Stefan constructed a 350 plus kilometer race on an island so small was absolutely incredible, because it really didn't feel like you were ever going back on yourself, or to be honest, it didn't even feel like you were very close to where you had previously been. And it was classic. Only after the race, you look back at the entire map of all 100 checkpoints or so, and you realize you went up and down every single valley on that island. And it was just really special. Obviously, a completely, different environment for us in South Africa, like the coral reefs and the warm water and an island lifestyle is quite far. Maybe there's certain parts of South Africa that obviously have beautiful white beaches and turquoise water, but it's very different to close to Mauritius. And it was something really special. It was an incredible experience. And I had done a couple of other little, maybe smaller expeditions, but that was, I think, my real introduction to the big game. And the bug bit, as you can imagine. And I don't think I've missed an expedition in Africa since. And I guess that brings me to where we are now. I'm very lucky in the fact that I get to sort of follow on the legacy,
Yeah, and that's a really we talk about the entry to the race very often, right? How people get into the sport and what picks them up along the way. And your trajectory is rather, to call it common is an overstatement, but the idea that you were exposed to adventure racing, you heard about it, you read about it, you saw about it, you danced around it for a while, and then you jumped in. And after jumping in, and now it's a large part of what you do, right? Because you've gone from observer to racer to race director. And I would argue that, coming up in the sport in the shadow of Expedition Africa and all that Heidi and Stefan put on is a pretty powerful way to start your experience, because they were known for their high challenge, their high quality, which set for you your own mindset about being a race director. So it sounds like after doing that race, did you do, how many of the Expedition Africas did you do following that?
I think every single one. Yeah. Lesotho, what was in between? Yeah, Lesotho, and then World Champs, of course. And I feel like I'm missing one or two in between there. But
the memory fades over time, right? You don't sleep for days at a time. It fades into the distance. And so clearly you took your experience at those races and then you build it into your own race, right? We always mirror races that we enjoy. So how has your transition been like from racer to race director?
Yeah, I find it to be honest, the race directorship or making events, if you want to call it that, kind of was a bit fortuitous. I'd been working in the events industry and behind the scenes on various different types of events for years, over a decade, on trail runs and mountain bike events. And I got to organize my first adventure race by just fluke. And it was the most rewarding experience for me to watch the weekend go past. Of course, it was just a single day race. And to watch a 12-hour race and just watch each and every single participant love every aspect of what all the work you had put in. It's like, I feel like you're technically an artist. You build this course and you build what you think and what looks pretty, and you take people to amazing places and you try and find sneaky route choice options, and then you watch it unfold, and it's the most rewarding thing to see people enjoy what you basically built.
The racers and the race directors that have these great experiences are people who they see a swath of land and they have access to it, and they think to themselves, like, I want to create a situation in which we're going to have racers, could be X amount of teams, going into that environment for a period of time, whether it be a 1-day race, 5-day race, 8, whatever it is. And then to compare it to artistry, I don't think is an overblown example. I think that's a really accurate way to talk about it. When race directors really lean into it, right? There's always going to be a spectrum of race director, right? Folks who just they approach the race in different ways. But overwhelmingly, when a race director brings that level of attention and care into the race design, it reflects very strongly upon the racer experience.
Yeah, I think without a doubt. I mean, as you say, how would I say I bring my race experience into what I do is like I really, exactly that. I feel that I try and attend a lot of time and detail to literally every single checkpoint and where it's going to be positioned and why and how, and is it going to challenge them and in what way? And I thoroughly enjoy a course that tests teams, tests individuals to a strong degree, because I feel like you leave a much stronger person and better person for it. I mean, I don't think I need to elaborate on that, because that's generally why we do adventure racing. Most of us is we enjoy the test, we enjoy the challenge. And I think, it's super special to be able to take those experiences, let alone the amazing places you get to, but to take those life lessons and learnings and try and like bring them into your course, mm-hmm. And as I said, you get to watch it unfold. It's special.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's so I'm curious about your personal philosophy with race course design, right? Because there's different ways to approach it. Some race directors, they go linear, right? They point A, will race all the way to point Z along the way. Some race directors use some out and backs. They build in some lollipops. A lot of it is driven by space and by time. Some race directors have a ton of checkpoints. They have a ton of CPs. They have a ton of transition areas. And some race directors are like, no, you get one checkpoint every 25 miles. What is your philosophy when it comes to race course production? What would the racer expect doing one of your racers?
Yeah, I think so. So a big part of me, and I think we'll touch on the venue itself, but mm-hmm. I think I come from a conservation background. I've grown up in what South Africa we call the bush, but basically areas of, safari. And I have an immense, connection to the natural world, and the wilderness aspect really excites me. So I would say, for the most part, I think every race is different. I mean, there may be legs where I have a lot of checkpoints, but for the most part, it's vast, beautiful landscapes, but generally with quite big distance between checkpoints. Lots of route choice because the wilderness allows it.
Gotcha. And yeah, and that's a common thing, in I found with races that are down in that part of the world. You have these huge swaths of land, and you can move across them. We're out of, the dark zone is based out of the Northeast United States. We're based out of New Jersey. Huge population density, a lot more people than open land, right? And so you have to make the best use you can of what you have. But there are parts of the world that are just wide open. And it sounds like that's a common theme in your part of the world, in South Africa and in Namibia, that border the southern part of the continent, is that you're just able to have these expansive races. And you kind of saw that, like, you mentioned you did the last World Championships in South Africa. The amount of distance that your team covered had to be amazing compared to what, days and days and days on the course and huge distances between checkpoints. You have that luxury in your part of the world to do that. So therefore, a lot of route choice, a lot of team dynamics.
Yeah, no doubt. No, exactly that, as you said, Brian. So where the race will be held is on the border of obviously South Africa and Namibia, as you've mentioned. And in reality, that province of South Africa is also very low density. It's not like Cape Town or other parts of the country where there's actually, not as high, certainly as New Jersey or parts of the States, but still higher. But the Northern Cape, which is where the race is just vast. I mean, South Africa, I guess, in general, is vast.
You're literally on the border. Like I was looking at the race website. The host site is on the river that borders. You could throw a baseball and be in Namibia. Like that's how close it is.
Correct. That is spot on. And I haven't yet revealed what is. You're probably going to be the first person to hear this, but very excitingly, it will very likely be a race that actually goes through 2 different countries mid-race, which is something really special. And it takes quite a bit of permission and requirements to get that right, but it's coming together, and it's, that's a dream come true. At first, to be honest, I wanted to host it in one country and just on the South African side. And the fact that I could, fit even more adventure into one race, it opened my mind so much, and it's something, special.
Well, did you find that and obviously we don't talk a lot about the race course until the race actually starts, right? So I don't want to, don't go into the course. Did you find that you had, there's this phrase called choice paralysis. You have so many options and so many things to do that you couldn't you have a tough time making a decision about your routing choice because you can go here, you can go there, you could do this, you could do that. Was that your experience of putting the race together?
Yeah, I think it often is. I think the more races I've put on, and I've put on some pretty lengthy ones on in weekend long races in South Africa, and I think each year I get better at not worrying about the many other options, because definitely you start with a blank palette and you're like, where do I start? And then you kind of, I think, get a groove where you start to realize, okay, this is the goodness. This is where you want to take them. This is where you want to go. And then start linking it up from there like that, and not worry too much about as you say, the 900 other options you could bring them in from.
Right.
So it's special. Yeah. It's cool.
So tell us a bit about the race that you have coming up. I know that it's a big race, big distance, a lot of challenge. Tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, so it's named the Ratel, as we Brian alluded to earlier, and it's named after a honey badger, which is I think it's similar to many badger species around the world, but it's a very tenacious and tough and almost like a dynamite comes in small packages type animal. And they stand up to lions, they stand up to prides of lions, as a matter of fact. And I felt like that was the reason I had to name my race that, because I feel like a lot of an adventure racer in reality. Mm-hmm. I feel it's that, like in a not inability to back down, but a desire to just continue to strive and continue to keep pushing. And anyway, that's where the name comes from. And it's been a dream of mine for many years to host a race in the Richtersveld, which is this area we were talking about on the border of South Africa and Namibia. And yeah, an absolute dream come true, to be honest. We haven't had a race since 2007 there. So it's just shy on 2 decades since an adventure race even passed through that area, because it's quite far and it's quite remote. It's obviously not every second year that there's a race there. So
it sounds like you've worked really hard to sort of to get yourself into a chunk of the country that was, I'm going to use the word inaccessible. Remote's a better word, right? You really had to work hard to put that together. When is the race being held? What are the dates?
So the 4th is the travel day. The first evening is the 4th of June, and then the wrap-up travel day would be the 15th of June. So the race dates itself will start 7th of June in the morning and end on the 14th in like the afternoon.
Wow, big race. What's the distance on the race? That's a lot of time out there.
So approximately 450 kilometers over 4 days. So just under 4 days should be the front team. And yeah, the course is open for just shy on 8 days.
Wow. Holy cow. This is a big race. This isn't a 24-hour race. And this is so tell us, so if a team were to be interested in coming out, right? If they say to themselves, destination race, we could do this. What does it look like? You mentioned it's a remote area. Teams always, when they look at races, they always think about the idea of getting to the race is the hardest part. And so what does it look like from a race travel perspective? If a team wanted to come and do it, where would they fly into, and how would they get actually out to the race site? Do they go in through Johannesburg? Is it Cape Town? Like, what's that?
No, brilliant. Great question. And something that I've obviously, being an adventure racer, attended quite a bit of energy and effort to, is that there are travel packages that just simplify it as best as possible. There is obviously travel time attached to it, but that's the life of a remote destination. And so fly into Cape Town. So wherever the teams are coming from, Cape Town would be your departure destination. And then we organizing a bus transfer from there to the start line. So at least there's no hassle of that. And then the specific start finish venue is just a beautiful resort in the middle of this incredible wilderness area, right on the river. So there's lots of options from, slightly more affordable to slightly more luxury. And so I feel like it caters for all. And there's of course, depending on where you're from, I guess there's visas required for both Namibia and South Africa. But besides that, I'm trying to definitely keep the admin, attached to it as small as possible, and it to be a pretty easy come, do the race. And even for some of the overseas teams, we've even got a bit of a tour package attached to it. So if teams want, they can reach out happily for that, to make a bit more of a holiday of it. I think that answers your question, eh?
Well, it's true. And I've had the chance to do some international races. And when I know that when we do a race, knowing that the race director has helped logistically on the other side, right? We raced in, for example, the Faroe Islands, right? You landed in Faroe and they did a great job putting together. You get there, van's waiting for you to help you load your bikes and your gear. Taking that off the table as a challenge is huge. And that's one thing that international race directors have really grabbed onto really well, is that when teams are traveling that far to come to a race, they do their best to make it easy to get to the start line, right? As best as they can. The race is hard enough as it is, and it's always lost. Everybody loses a bike box sometimes, right? It always, without fail, every single race somewhere, it's like team ABC, no gear. Can they come and load a bike out? And obviously that's what happens. Also, you pick up on the idea that, with the distance to travel to get to a venue, it's not uncommon for racers on either side to build in a holiday pre or post, right? And when you come off the course after 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days, it's nice to spend your time recovering. And also, too, is you won't get back there that soon, right? So take advantage of the natural area and do all of that.
No doubt.
With a race of this size and this breadth, how many teams are you looking to host total do you want to bring in?
I think a dream come true for my first year would be 25 teams. We've already got a fair few of those, but with South Africa, there's no limits. Luckily we pretty, just from a logistics perspective, I guess I'm limited, but in reality, I can solve any problem in terms of numbers. I guess the first year dream come true would be 20, 25 teams.
Well, that's a very South African statement of, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the logistics is pretty sorted and not too much issues there. So it doesn't almost matter how many teams I would have. I would definitely be able to solve it.
So I'm sure that an aspiring team who's coming out is gonna be listening to this episode, right? This very often serves as early beta for a team to get ready. That general part of the world, what's the terrain like? Is it dry? Is it dusty? Is it green? Is it verdant? Is there water? Like if you're speaking to the teams now and they're coming out to do the race, what do you want to encourage them to focus on in their preparation, their training?
Brilliant. A good question. So the Richtersveld is what I dub the holy grail of adventure in South Africa. I feel like it's an incredible arena. It's a mountainous desert. So it is very arid, very dry, but with these immensely beautiful towering peaks that are cut by this incredible perennial river, which is funny enough, South Africa's largest river, the Orange River, cuts the Richtersveld almost in half. And either side of it is it's geologically unbelievable. It's almost like picture Namibia, but just congested in a way. Very arid, rocky, quite loose in places, and then as the mountains break, there are these big wide open sandy plains. So gotcha. It's a harsh area, no doubt, don't get me wrong. It's definitely not an easy place to race, but it's landscapely one of the most mind-blowing places, I feel like.
Well, you haven't lied about it. I mean, the race is named after a honey badger, which is a tough animal, right? So you clearly telegraphed to the racers that this is not an easy race. Whenever a race director brings teams into this kind of environment, there's an expectation that the race director simultaneously supports the teams in the race, but also makes the teams do a lot of the work on their own. How do you strike that balance between the water, the dryness, the terrain, that there's enough support for the team, but also that they're able to really strive on their own efforts and power?
Yeah, so absolutely no doubt. We have most definitely thought hard also about where we racing and it being quite a tough place, and for sure where feasibly possible, we'll for sure assist in terms of you're not going to expect teams to carry 20 liters of water, and also importantly, it's at a time of year where the conditions are at its mildest. So even though it's a really hot desert in the summer months, it's almost inhospitable. Whereas in the winter months, which is midwinter when we will be racing there, it's it's pretty manageable actually. The temperatures are actually really good. It can get hot, but for the most part, it's actually really an incredible place to race at that time of year.
Well, it's funny 'cause it's on the southern hemisphere, right? So the seasons shift. So you say you race in June. Those of us in the northern hemisphere, we think hot and warm. Those on the other side of the globe, it's more leaning towards fall, and you're leading into winter. I know it's a little early for that. So from a temperature perspective, what do you expect the swings to be from a, and this is always a guess by race directors, right? So no one's going to hold you to it. What are you telling the teams to prep for in terms of temperature?
No, so yeah, you can imagine, I think typical with most deserts in the mid early morning hours, if you want to call it that, midnight to morning hours, it'll probably drop below zero, but it's that dry cold, and then generally pretty manageable and actually great riding conditions. But and then the daytimes, you're looking probably about low 30 Celsius on average. Okay. And there can be cold fronts, which can very much change the dynamic, and it can be significantly colder in some of the days and even a bit overcast. But I wouldn't say in that part of the world in winter it's not normal. It's generally blue skies and just pretty warm.
Yeah, and like any good adventure racer worth their salt realizes that they'll be shivering overnight, sweating during the day. Right, you have to prepare yourself for that. That's just there's going to be a 40 to 50 degree temperature swing very often in these races, where you go from freezing to warm in the blink of an eye. Is it a season in terms of like, is it a rainy season? Is it dry? Is it like what could the racer generally expect? And climate's always hard nowadays because it feels like the whole world is shifting in terms of climate. But for the most part, what's been the traditional weather pattern for that part of the world at that time?
No, so as I was saying, generally speaking, it's actually cloudless skies, maybe a bit of clouds, and it's actually normally pretty perfect days. There'll be some wind, but as I said, it'll for the most part be pretty mild. There can be a cold front that pushes through, and then that will bring a little bit of overcast weather and can bring rain. But it's
not the rainy season, right? It's not like 2 days worth of rain. So what do you?
It's not the rainy season.
No. By the way, now that we've said that, it's the last day of February in 2025. It's going to be the biggest rainstorm in the history of South Africa is going to arrive. We've now doomed the racers to have that be the case. So we apologize in advance. So when you think about it, you sit back and you look at the race course that you're designing and putting together. How do you describe the challenges that they will come across? Like what are the big things that you would tick off? You've mentioned the arid weather, the arid conditions. You've mentioned the distance, things like that. Like what really, when people look back on this race and they say to themselves, I did this race and as a result, it was like this. How do you think they'll describe the race experience?
Yeah, I think so. If you want to call it the relentlessness, I think we'll be pretty honest. I will certainly, because it's such incredible paddling, there will be quite a big focus on paddling and some paddle legs, and I think generally some pretty large, big trek legs, which some of them will involve quite a significant amount of altitude gain. We're not, speaking of altitude itself, we're obviously not very high. We're not that far from the ocean, so we're not high in that regard. But in terms of actually, gain of meters in a leg, it can be big. Depending on route choice, of course, how much up and down you do or how much around and about you choose. But yeah, it's for sure some long legs is something that teams will definitely need to prepare for. And as a result, as you can imagine, heavy packs and... Right. Just doing the distance, just making sure you're going piece by piece, So
it sounds like as you describe the course and you describe the preparation for the racers, and we said before that all races have different attitudes, environments, expectations. This feels like, to me, as you describe it, like a classic expedition race in terms of they're covering a lot of ground. There's not a ton of checkpoints. It's going to be about teamwork, about sticking together, and about navigation. Am I hearing you correctly when you talk about it that way?
Yeah, I think, of course, I'm a navigator. I'm a very much big lover of maps and big lover of route choice, to be honest, that I feel no doubt, it's a race for a navigator. I will try and keep the navigators very on their toes, almost from start to finish, and that way, there's very little sort of just transit legs. For the most part, my races are point to point. So yeah, you as you say, you're crossing beautiful landscapes and going to different ones at each transition.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the most common criticisms when I talk to racers and I chat with race directors, the criticism is a strong word, but one of the most common things that bug people a bit is that when they feel as if they're just on a trail, just on a track, right? The idea like, okay, I punched that checkpoint and it's going to be 50K to the next checkpoint. And we're going to get on this road and that trail and we're going to go that way for 10 hours and then we'll punch it again. And people are kind of like, it's not really... They don't necessarily sign. While endurance is a big part of it, and you have to have that GER, it feels like teams really want to have the chance to say, "Listen, that this is an adventure, it's an exploration. We have a lot of choice here. We want to go." It sounds like you've tried to bring that ethic into your race, right? You've avoided the transit legs of just walking from one place to another. Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, no doubt, where possible. I mean, as I think you can tell, and I've described, I'm quite a wild man, and I wouldn't be doing the wilderness justice if I went and just kept you on the sort of stock standard path. And
right.
I think it's always been something that's excited me, and it's something that I will for sure put in my race a lot. It's, as you said that word, the word adventure is thrown around a lot nowadays, and I feel like this will genuinely be a very raw and meaningful adventure, you won't.
Yeah, I love the idea of the fact that I love the idea of the fact that you're working so hard to bring a race into almost 18 years since the race has been there. Good time of the year, good conditions, challenging. You have the mountain biking built in, you have the paddling built in, you have the trekking built in. From a technical perspective, right? The ability to be very good at these things. Like, what will the mountain biking be like? Are you encouraging teams to work on their technical skills? Is about like, what do you feel if people are getting prepared for the race on a cycling perspective? What do you encourage them to focus on right now?
Yeah, I guess probably the first thing that springs to mind is being able to ride on loose sand. I certainly don't intend on putting people on sand for very long, but just the nature of the terrain. It's rocky, it's loose. There is, because of its remoteness, there's no custom-made, crafted single tracks. It's very much old Jeep tracks that have existed and some off-trail stuff. And with that, obviously, just becomes like quite rocky and, rugged and technical in terms of just a natural rugged and technical. Do you know what I mean? Not a crafted rugged and technical.
Yeah, you're not bringing them into a mountain bike park to go down the side of a hill, right? This is a tough landscape in which Jeeps and other trucks have carved out these trails and these roads. That's where the racers will end up on that kind of travel. And so I think a big part of that is from a racer perspective is, and I've heard this about other races in South Africa, is be prepared for strong bike handling skills when you don't think you need them, because the road is going to be a challenge itself. And so therefore be ready for that, right? Keep your head down, watch for a loose rock and things like that. And so to your point, it's not really like they're not doing downhill technical mountain biking, but they are going to be on terrain that's going to require them to pay attention to where they're going.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, the area, or part of it, especially largely on the South African side, is regarded as a overlanding or 4x4 kind of wild destination to go and visit and camp. And with that, you can imagine that the tracks are pretty tough. So even as you say, when you're on a normal track, it's still not. It still keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, it's not going to be 30 miles of paved blacktop. That's what's going to come out there.
No. There are sections of beautiful open, what we call district gravel roads, which is definitely your moments to respite and take a breath as a team. And there's no doubt, of course, there's some of that, but for the most part, it's exciting mountain biking. Let's put it that way. It keeps you on your toes, and there's lots of twists and turns, and it's exciting.
They got to work for the finish. Right, Robert?
That's
They
it.
can't make it too easy on them. They have to earn that finish line. What about the paddling? You mentioned a lot of paddling. What have you in terms of the paddling preparation? Will the teams be? Are you supplying the boats? Are they bringing their own boats? Like, what do you want from that perspective?
Yeah, supplying the boats, most definitely. And what will be exciting is teams will be most likely required to attach their bike to the boats. So just to add to the adventure, they may need to paddle with it on there. But luckily, the boats are, well, maybe not luckily, because some people will probably not be happy with if they're paddling into a headwind with a bigger boat. But it obviously allows you to carry the bikes a bit easier. So there's pros and cons to it. But yeah, really, very very exciting paddling. Like, it's not just flat water. It's a beautiful river. Scenically, it's a beautiful river, but it's also just quite exciting and quite fun. It's actually one of South Africa's most sort of commercially run sections, or near there. I'm not going to obviously give away exactly where, but those areas, or that sort of 400-kilometer stretch of river up and down below, is largely the most paddled sections of South Africa. And it's when teams get there, they'll see why. It's really fun.
That's great.
And wild.
It's great that you're tapping into that, right? Because we do it's always good when a race travels through a somewhat commercially trafficked area. It speaks to the quality of the area, right? The reason why there's commercial industries, it's a gorgeous place to be. So hearing that it's going to be sort of near that part of South Africa clearly is a good thing for the racers to know about and to hear about. I want to push back into your experience as a racer itself, right? You mentioned you've done all the Expedition Africas, you've done all that. What was your team's experience like at World Championships? And what did you learn there that you applied to your race directing?
Yeah, brilliant. To have world champs on home soil is, of course, quite a privilege. Mm-hmm. Not only was it an incredible spectacle that Heidi and Stefan put on, it was great to see other teams and show off your country in reality. And I think no doubt there's a benefit to racing on home soil. Like, there is no doubt. I think the race for us as a team, we did well. But I think purely based on the fact that the course was quite relentless and just didn't stop. And we were just under 900 kilometers in the end of it all.
Yeah,
and
I remember when I recorded the Course Reveal podcast with Stefan, I couldn't believe when we saw that he was still talking about the race. Like, when he was walking me, I'm like, and we're still racing, and we're still racing, and we're still racing. I mean, it's basically twice the distance of the race that you're putting out. Right? It's incredible.
So crazy to even think of that.
Did you approach it as I saw this down in Ecuador when we raced with down there with Santiago's race direction, wonderful race director, Santiago. Did you find that for all of it being a world championship, in reality, it was it felt like a South African national championship? Like, you were all fighting amongst yourself and your teammates. Like, you kind of knew, that's great that team flew in from, overseas and did great. But in reality, you were racing other South African teams as well. Was that your experience?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Brian. We literally, the last hill on the bike leg, which was the second last leg, so it was very near the end in the grander scheme of things. We, funny enough, on the saddle, found another South African team. And they looked at us and we looked at them and we were like, oh, wow, it's on. We can't believe it, because shame, they were hard done by with some just, unlucky situations of sickness and mechanicals. And we managed to just somehow close a really immensely large gap. And when we saw them, we were like, we can't believe this. We didn't expect to see them and they didn't expect to see us. And then it was all on.
It's like day 9. Right, like day 9. It's like, might as well be day 1. Like we're gonna beat that team. Same experience. I'm racing overseas. We're in whatever place, and you cross another American team in a transition area, and you're like, are they leaving? How fast are they going? And all of a sudden, that competitive nature just does not go away. And so you had that experience at Worlds, obviously, and I'm sure you're gonna have a fair amount of South African teams at your race. So that experience is going to be somewhat recreated. What did you find in your world's experience? What was the hardest part for your team? Where did you have to make the most adjustments to make it way through that monster course?
Yeah, I think without a doubt for us, I think our biggest reset was actually really early on. At the end of the second bike leg, we didn't move very efficiently through what was the first night, and it got extraordinarily hot that next day, even for us South Africans.
I remember that.
One teammate took immense strain, like so much so that it was unlike him, but he even thought like, whew, is this going to be, technically the end of my race? And I think luckily we as a team just sort of, recollected and revitalized ourselves at the transition at the end of that bike leg. We limped into the transition, but once we got there, we looked after ourselves, took a bit of time, and realized that there's a lot of course. Well, obviously there was a lot of course still to go, and we proceeded to get stronger from there on. And I think it was an awesome lesson on just keep going, because expedition racing, I think it's the thing that excites me the most I just want to touch on that competitive aspect that you were speaking about, be it nationally or internationally. I find that one of the most awesome things about adventure racing is how the result is never the be all and end all. And let's be honest, most of us are out there for what is an incredibly grand adventure and to take us to the most incredible places. But that competitive aspect is something that I really enjoy and I really try and thrive on in my races. Like there's a big component that excites me of, competitive racing and really strong teams and even mid-pack teams. And I guess everybody's in their own race, and it's something that's really awesome. Like there's so much camaraderie built out on an adventure race between teams and racing each other, and it's special. You can you still have a beer at the end of it all, and you're like, that was a good race. Thanks for pushing us, and vice versa.
Well, that's the hardest part too. When I talk about adventure racing to adventure racers, we live in a sports environment in which the person at the front of the pack, the team that finishes in first place, is the most important part of the race. And adventure racing, it's interesting to point out that there are teams that are mid-pack, back of the pack, who are slugging away as hard as those front teams. And their story and their experience deserves to be recognized and discussed also, right? Which is an interesting dynamic for a lot of people because, your race is 4.5 days. Your winner's going to cross the finish line, right? That's just what's going to happen, right? We always find that for the most part, the winning team probably is done in about 65 to 70% of the allotted time, right? And then everybody else kind of follows in after that. And so to your point, you're balancing the competitive nature of the race, right? The fact that these teams are slugging away at the front, who wants to be on the top of the podium? But then behind them is going to be all these individual team stories about their own challenge and their own races. And it sounds like you want to underline that, right? There's the competitive nature at the front, but there's also honoring the racers and the teams that will have their own adventure along the way.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, I might be in a more competitive team nowadays, but I've definitely been that team towards the mid, even towards the backpack. And I absolutely admire each and every single individual team. And the fact that they, as you say, everybody's in their own race, whether you're racing for first or whether you're racing for seventh, it's about the journey and it's about, overcoming whatever challenges are thrown at you. And potentially those challenges may involve other teams around you and having to adapt and having to, outwit them or outstrength them or outlast them or whatever. And I think there's an immense beauty in that. Doesn't matter where you actually come overall. It's about, those team journeys in the middle. And I guess, I don't need to touch on it, but it's the team aspect is what has always excited me about adventure racing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that, right? I think that's what separates the sport from a lot of other athletic pursuits is that. And you mentioned before, you talk about how in the World Champs, how one of your teammates just got clobbered with the heat, right? Got clobbered and you limped into that TA. That was the phrase you used. And I've limped into a fair amount of TAs myself. And the fact that you use the TA experience to catch the breath, to refresh, you realize there's a lot of race ahead of you. and then to go back out and keep doing it, right? That's the beauty in it, right? Like your team has a hard time, you rally, you get behind each other, you take care of yourselves and your teammates, and you push yourself back out into the course, and that gets created over and over again. And I think that with your race and with the other races that we see, and by the way, this could be on a shorter race too. This is not only for expedition level races. The fact that we get to be witnesses to that human behavior is pretty fascinating.
Unbelievable. And it touches on, I think, pretty much my first point. And that's for me why it's so incredibly rewarding to watch people go about doing your course, the one that you set out there, and you watch them just be challenged and for the most part overcome all the challenges. And it's incredible.
Yeah, that's with the sports special too. The sports special also in the idea that from time to time you come across somebody who's on the team who signs up, who may not feel too confident in their ability level. There's concerns about themselves, and they end up succeeding at a really, really high level. And they can't, when the race is done and they cross the finish line, they can't believe that they just did that thing, which they thought had been unavailable to them previously. And then when they leave the race course, we create this encapsulated community, right? You're bringing in these 25 teams, 100 people, you're putting this race on, you're creating a culture and a community. You shepherd them along the way, and then they go back to their respective lives. They never go back the same people.
Absolutely. I mean, you've literally nailed it on the dots. That is it. Like, I think that's a big thing of all my races is I hope that I can challenge teams enough that they, are really going, I've really got to dig deep here. Or as a team, we've got to dig deep. And there's an immense beauty in that, let's be honest, versus, I don't know, some slightly, if you want to call it easier races or things that are just, we are very much a species where we like things easy, and that's why adventure racing is a select sort of core of people that just love to push to another level. And to be honest, be uncomfortable.
Yeah, you're right about that. Yeah, I've very often mentioned Grant Killian, who did Untamed New England, and he was the guest on the 100th episode of the Dark Zone, and he talked about the idea very often that we have adventure racing of these contrived inconveniences, right? Like, think about it, like somebody wakes up in the morning, they train for these races, they invest the time, the capital, the money, the travel, the vacation time, they go to a faraway place to throw themselves at something that is incredibly hard, challenging, and difficult. They kind of clobber themselves in a healthy, fun sort of way, but they still do. And that's how they spend their time. Whereas they very easily could have been laying on a beach somewhere, right? And so it speaks to the person, not that we don't like our laying on the beach as adventure racers, but it speaks to a personality profile that the sport caters to. And it's not for everybody, right? We recognize that, but the fact that there's a subset of our fellows who want to do things like this, and then we, race directors, race media, race organizers, they put all that together for people to go and have these experiences. It speaks to a piece of human nature that is not really celebrated that often outside of adventure racing.
Completely. No, you've hit the nail on the head, and I think that's also what makes the community of adventure racers something so incredible as well, is that there is definitely a base or a core that is also similar in all of us. That it's always a treat to be surrounded by adventure racers.
Right. And then you have racers who become race directors, right? Because they've enjoyed the experience as a racer, so therefore they say, I want to give this to other people. That's what you do.
Exactly. No, exactly that.
So what is so obviously your life right now is being subsumed by planning this race, right? It's February, it's right around the corner. This race is going to end and the world's going to move on. What does your racing career look like going forward? What do you have down the road for yourself? Is it over? Is there more? Are you traveling? Like what is Team Robert going to do going forward?
No, so I'm part of in the last sort of 2 to 3 years, we have a bit of a regular team here in South Africa called Team Terramata. And it just was a dream to how the team kind of formulated and came together in 2022, actually for Lesotho Expedition Africa. And it's almost some of my best mates that I've done many expeditions, not expedition adventure races, but just other sort of expeditions, big long bike rides, big bike tours, other endeavors. And luckily we came together and they were all pretty motivated. And who knows where we'll go. The team will chop and change a bit here and there as every adventure race team does. Sure. But definitely a dream of mine is to go and race many more world champs and races overseas. I haven't yet quite had the chance to get overseas and do too many races. Of course, the ones on a local scale, like Rodrigues, yes. But no doubt, a dream of mine would be to race towards the top end at a world champs one day. And I think that's also the beauty of an adventure race is your career can be quite long, let's be honest. And
right. There's a lot of
body together.
Yeah, the phrase golden age is thrown around a whole lot, right? So I hesitate to use it here, but I can't help but think of the amount of races and racers that are out there for everybody right now. The regional series, stuff in South Africa, stuff in Europe, South America, North America, Asia, Oceania. Like, if people have the capacity and the time to travel and go do races, there's just so much going on now. Like, it's the end of February. There are teams right now that are landing in Tasmania to go do Chris Dixon's race, the legend down there, right? And then we have Canada this year coming up with the World Championships. And then Raiden France is hosting the World Champs next year. Like, there's this ongoing, you can do the regional races if you want, keep it local, or you can do these bigger races where you can go anywhere in the world. And I always laugh at how these races are they're like family reunions, right? We all see each other and then they race. It's funny I'm involved in the United States Adventure Racing Championship, right? The USARA Championship. And one of the biggest feedback points that the organizers received from the race that was last year was in West Virginia, now going to be in Arkansas. The feedback form was the racers wanted more time together socially before and after the race. That they want to see their friends, they want to see the community, which is a big part of the race itself, right? It's not just the start line and the finish line, it's what you build on either side of it.
Big time. And I think, I'm sure anybody that did an Expedition Africa will attest to Heidi and Stefan's legacy in which, or also big focus that they put on that aspect of the race as well. And there was always an incredible, what do you want to call it, support around the race. It wasn't just the race time itself. And they encouraged that, as you say, that social aspect that was really special. And it's an awesome legacy, if you want that, going back to legacy. It's like an awesome thing to try and follow on, is even if my race would be a little bit more remote and a little bit different than maybe some of their races in the past, it's still a big focus of mine, is literally sharing those war stories around a campfire. Because let's be honest, that's a lot of the joy is sharing the stories with fellow adventure racers that you don't, as you say, if it's an international race, you don't see them until potentially world champs next year, or maybe another 5 years until you see them.
Yeah, I just had on the show Harold Zundel. Harold this episode will come out before this one. It's coming out in the next few days. He did a great job with it. He's a former U.S. Navy SEAL, big adventure racer. And he talked about how the adventure racing experience replicates very often his experience in the SEALs, the military. It's a team. There's common challenge. There's necessary working with each other. There's all these things come together. Obviously, you take away the threat of imminent death and violence and war. To the side, he even said that in the episode. But then you create it's war stories without the war, right? And to your point, that's what you're saying there. And that's what you're looking to create there, that you took that community out of your experience and you now want to create their own community also.
No, it's so funny you touch on that. I often joke and say that we are as close to those olden day explorers as you can get in reality. Like, there is a big history here. And South Africa's history in general is actually quite short in comparison to other parts of the world. But if you go and look at South Africa's pretty short 400-year history, it's involved a lot of hard exploration where people just went with ox wagons and they just missioned into what were these really rough and hard mountains. Of course, they didn't have the roads we do now, and they would take months to just get like a couple of kilometers down the road. And I think that exploration and that inner explorer comes out in all of us when we adventure race. And I think that's the beauty of map and a compass and self-navigated, is it's just raw. You just immersed in that moment.
Yeah, I had David Webster on. David Webster, team AC/DC. His first adventure race was Itera. Like, holy cow, right? Like a 5-day race and crazy. And he talked about on his episode, I'll put the link in the show notes. This was a while ago, years ago. He talked about how his desire to do an adventure race, he felt was like a natural extension of his country's cultural dedication to seeing more about the world. Like, he felt that was like the natural part of it, right? And in New York City, up on 72nd Street, you could come to New York, you could visit something it's called the Explorers Club. Literally, it's a building. It's like something out of a movie. And they have the boats from these massive tours that they've done. They have a picture. They have the flag that was on the moon at some point. That there's this piece of human nature that pushes towards wanting to learn more, do more, be more. And there's many ways to do that in the world, and adventure racing is one of those ways.
Yeah, for sure. One of the most rawest and just most like in a way, almost uncommercialized ways. Like, it's really quite just raw and honest. Like, there's the course is not marked. There's not, let's be honest, we carry, generally speaking, almost everything ourselves. Mm-hmm. And it's as close as to, I guess, an olden day explorer you can get. And it's awesome. It's awesome.
That's right, folks. Episode 120 of The Dark Zone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Hard to believe we have 120 of these episodes out there, and we keep chugging along. If you like what you hear on The Dark Zone, please head over to your podcast link of choice and click, and subscribe. That helps the algorithm send people our direction, and thanks for being a listener. And remember what we always say, if you keep racing, we'll keep talking.